They handed Cassy Gomez a mop instead of a rifle. While her male counterparts prepared for combat deployment, she was assigned to base maintenance duty. "Women don't belong on the front lines," they said. "Too much risk, not enough strength." But when enemy fire pinned down Alpha Squad in the mountains of Afghanistan, and a Taliban sniper had them trapped with nowhere to run, Cassy Gomez would prove that sometimes the most underestimated soldier becomes the most dangerous weapon. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the personnel office at Fort Braxton, casting harsh shadows across Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson's weathered face. Behind his desk, commendations and unit photos covered the wall. Images of successful missions, decorated soldiers, and brotherhood forged in combat. None of those photos included women in combat roles. Cassy Gomez stood at attention in front of his desk, her uniform crisp and her posture perfect. At 24, she had already completed advanced marksmanship training, tactical operations courses, and physical conditioning programs that many of her male peers struggled to finish. Her service record was spotless, her test scores consistently in the top 5%. Yet here she was, once again, being told why she wasn't suitable for the assignment she'd requested. "Sergeant Gomez," Thompson began, not bothering to look up from the paperwork scattered across his desk, "I've reviewed your application for combat deployment with the 3rd Infantry Division. I'm afraid I can't approve it." The rejection wasn't unexpected, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. This was the 4th time in 18 months that Cassy had requested frontline duty, and the 4th time she'd been turned down. Around the base, whispers followed her, some calling her ambitious, others suggesting she was trying to prove something that didn't need proving. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Cassy's voice remained steady, though her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thompson finally glanced up, his gray eyes cold and dismissive. "Go ahead. My scores exceed the minimum requirements in every category: physical fitness, marksmanship, tactical assessment, psychological evaluation. I've completed the same training as the men who've been approved for deployment. I don't understand the basis for this decision." A thin smile crossed Thompson's lips, not friendly but patronizing. "Sergeant, combat isn't about test scores. It's about real-world application under extreme pressure. The men you'd be serving alongside need to trust that their teammates can handle the physical and mental demands of warfare. They need to know that in a life-or-death situation, every soldier can carry their weight." The implication was clear, though never stated directly. Thompson continued, "I'm assigning you to base operations, inventory management, equipment maintenance, administrative support. These are crucial roles that—" "Respectfully, sir, those aren't the roles I trained for." Cassy's voice carried a hint of frustration that she immediately regretted showing. Thompson's expression hardened. "Sergeant Gomez, you seem to be under the impression that you get to choose your assignments based on personal preference. Let me clarify something for you. I decide where my soldiers serve based on what's best for the unit and the mission. And right now, what's best is having you support our combat teams from here on base." As Cassy left the personnel office, the familiar weight of disappointment settled on her shoulders. She walked through the corridors of Fort Braxton, passing bulletin boards covered with deployment announcements, mission briefings, and photos from active operations overseas. Her boots echoed against the polished floors as she made her way to the mess hall, where conversations about upcoming deployments filled the air. At a corner table, Staff Sergeant Jake Miller and Corporal Ryan Torres were discussing their orders for Afghanistan. Miller, a burly man from Texas with arms covered in tattoos, gestured animatedly as he described the mission parameters. Torres, younger and leaner but equally confident, nodded along while cleaning his sidearm. "Heard Gomez got denied again," Torres said, glancing toward Cassy as she entered the mess hall. Miller snorted. "What did she expect?" Combat zones aren't diversity training programs. When bullets start flying, you need soldiers who can handle the real deal, not someone who'll freeze up or become a liability. "I heard she's actually pretty good on the range," Torres offered, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Range shooting and combat shooting are completely different animals," Miller replied, raising his voice slightly to ensure Cassy could hear from across the room. "Out there, you're not shooting at paper targets. You're dealing with real enemies who shoot back, harsh weather, equipment failures, and split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies. It's not a place for someone who needs special accommodations. Cassy kept her expression neutral as she moved through the serving line, but every word hit its mark. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times. The assumption that her gender automatically made her a weak link, that her desire to serve in combat was somehow naive or attention-seeking. The mess hall buzzed with similar conversations. Soldiers shared war stories, compared equipment, and speculated about their upcoming missions. The camaraderie was evident. Jokes exchanged, plans made, a brotherhood built on shared purpose and mutual respect. But it was a brotherhood that, despite her qualifications and dedication, didn't include her. At the far end of the hall, Captain David Rodriguez sat with several other officers, reviewing deployment rosters on his tablet. Rodriguez had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and was known for his tactical expertise and ability to bring his teams home safely. When he noticed Cassy, he nodded politely but said nothing. She had approached him months earlier about joining his unit, and while he hadn't been dismissive like Thompson, his response had been diplomatically non-committal. "The politics are complicated, Gomez," he had said. "It's not about your abilities, but integration of women into combat units is still evolving. Command wants to move carefully, avoid any incidents that might set back progress." Translation: even officers who didn't personally oppose women in combat were unwilling to risk their careers by advocating for change. As Cassy found an empty table, she reflected on the path that had brought her here. Growing up in El Paso, Texas, she had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. Abuela Maria had been tough, practical, and fiercely independent, qualities she'd instilled in her granddaughter. "Mija," her grandmother would say, "the world will try to tell you what you can and cannot do, but your heart knows the truth. Sometimes you have to fight for the right to prove yourself." Cassy had enlisted immediately after high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and challenge herself in ways that civilian life couldn't provide. The military had given her structure, purpose, and skills she never imagined possessing. But it had also shown her the limitations that others wanted to impose based solely on her gender. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. "How are things, Mija? Any news on your deployment?" Cassy stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "Still working on it, Abuela. These things take time." She couldn't bring herself to admit that she was being systematically excluded from the very mission she'd trained her entire military career to accomplish. Her grandmother had sacrificed to support her military ambitions, working double shifts at the hospital to help pay for Cassy's college expenses before enlistment. The thought of disappointing her felt worse than Thompson's rejection. Across the mess hall, Miller's voice carried over the general conversation. "I've got nothing against women in the military. Hell, my sister's a Navy nurse, and she's tougher than most guys I know. But there's a difference between support roles and combat roles. When you're in the mountains with Taliban fighters shooting at you, you need every advantage you can get. You can't afford to have team members who might not be able to carry a wounded soldier to safety or who might hesitate at a crucial moment." Torres nodded in agreement. "Exactly. It's not personal, it's practical. Lives depend on having the strongest, most reliable team possible." What frustrated Cassy most wasn't the open hostility. She could handle that. It was the reasonable-sounding arguments that masked deeper prejudices. The assumption that her physical capabilities were inferior without any individual assessment. The belief that she would be more emotional or less decisive under pressure, despite no evidence to support those claims. Her military record told a different story. During advanced combat training at Fort Benning, she had consistently outperformed male peers in marksmanship, tactical decision-making, and endurance challenges. Her instructors had noted her exceptional composure under stress and her ability to maintain accuracy even when fatigued. But those achievements seemed to carry less weight than assumptions about women in general. As the afternoon wore on, Cassy reported to her assigned duties in the equipment depot, a climate-controlled warehouse filled with supplies destined for overseas operations. She organized inventory, checked serial numbers, and processed requisition forms while listening to the sounds of combat training exercises echoing from the nearby ranges. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was responsible for ensuring that combat teams had the equipment they needed to succeed, but she wasn't allowed to join them in using that equipment. Every rifle she cataloged, every piece of tactical gear she inspected, represented opportunities she was being denied. Sergeant First Class Patricia Williams, a career logistics specialist, supervised the depot operations. Williams had been in the Army for 15 years and had found success in support roles, but she'd never expressed interest in combat deployment. "Don't take it personally, Gomez," Williams said as they worked side by side organizing communications equipment. "The military's changing, but change takes time. Maybe in a few years things will be different." "How many years?" Cassy asked, more frustrated than bitter. "How long should qualified soldiers wait for permission to do their jobs?" Williams shrugged. "That's above my pay grade, but I can tell you this. Fighting the system head-on usually doesn't work. Sometimes you have to find other ways to prove your point." As evening approached and the base settled into its nighttime routine, Cassy made her way to the base gym. Physical training had always been her outlet, a way to channel frustration into something productive. The gym was mostly empty, with just a few soldiers finishing their workouts. She began with a punishing routine of pull-ups, push-ups, and weight training that would have challenged soldiers twice her size. Each representative was fueled by determination and frustration. Each set a reminder that she possessed the physical capabilities her critics claimed women lacked. Corporal Jennifer Hayes, one of the few other women on base, approached as Cassy finished her workout. Hayes worked in communications and had never expressed interest in combat roles, seeming content with her current assignment. "Heard you got denied again," Hayes said, not unkindly. "Maybe it's time to consider other options? There are plenty of ways to serve without being on the front lines." Cassy wiped sweat from her forehead with a towel. Considering her response, would you tell a male soldier to consider other options if he was qualified for combat but kept getting turned down? Hayes looked uncomfortable. "That's different. Men are expected to serve in combat roles. Why is it different? If I can do the job, why should my gender determine my assignment?" The question hung in the air between them, highlighting the contradictions that Cassy faced daily. She was expected to be grateful for the opportunity to serve in any capacity, even if that capacity didn't utilize her skills or fulfill her desire to contribute to critical missions. As she walked back to her barracks that evening, Cassy passed the motor pool, where vehicles were being prepared for deployment. Mechanics worked under bright lights, ensuring that every truck, Humvee, and specialized vehicle was mission-ready. Soon those vehicles would carry soldiers to Afghanistan, where they would face real dangers and make real differences. But she wouldn't be among them. In her room, Cassy sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She pulled up news articles about women in combat, policy changes, and ongoing debates about integration. The headlines painted a picture of gradual progress, but progress felt meaningless when it didn't translate to individual opportunities. She thought about her grandmother's words about fighting for the right to prove herself. Tomorrow would bring another day of inventory management and equipment cataloging, while her male peers prepared for the mission she desperately wanted to join. But Cassy Gomez had no way of knowing that in just a few weeks, circumstances would arise that would force everyone at Fort Braxton to reconsider their assumptions about women in combat. She had no idea that her opportunity to prove herself was coming, not in a controlled training environment or through bureaucratic approval, but in the most dangerous and unforgiving classroom of all, actual warfare, where lives hung in the balance and only results mattered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The emergency briefing came at 05:30 hours, jolting the entire base from routine to crisis mode. Red lights flashed in the corridors as soldiers rushed to the main briefing room, their faces grim with the understanding that something significant had happened overseas. Cassy was in the middle of her morning workout when the alarm sounded, and she quickly threw on her uniform before joining the crowd of personnel flooding into the assembly hall. Colonel Benjamin Harrison stood at the front of the room, his usually composed demeanor replaced by visible tension. Behind him, a large screen displayed satellite imagery of mountainous terrain marked with red zones and tactical symbols. The room fell silent as Harrison raised his hand. At 03:00 hours local time, Alpha Squad came under heavy fire during a reconnaissance mission in the Korengal Valley, Harrison began, his voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere. What was supposed to be a routine intelligence-gathering operation has turned into a hostage situation. 8 of our soldiers are pinned down in a Taliban stronghold with limited ammunition, no clear extraction route, and enemy snipers controlling the high ground. The room erupted in murmurs and concerned voices. Cassy felt her stomach tighten as she recognized several names on the casualty report being displayed. These weren't just fellow soldiers. They were people she knew, had trained with, had shared meals with in the mess hall. Harrison continued. The enemy has positioned at least 3 sniper teams on elevated positions surrounding our squad's location. They've effectively created a kill zone that's preventing both escape and rescue. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and we have a narrow window for extraction before the situation becomes even more critical. Captain Rodriguez stood from his seat in the front row. "Sir, what's the timeline for rescue operations?" "We're assembling a response team immediately," Harrison replied, "but the terrain presents unique challenges. The Taliban fighters have chosen their position strategically. It's accessible enough for them to maintain supply lines, but difficult enough to make a frontal assault nearly impossible. We need surgical precision, not overwhelming force." Staff Sergeant Miller raised his hand. "What about air support? Can't we call in drone strikes or helicopter gunships?" Harrison shook his head. "The hostages are too close to enemy positions. Any aerial bombardment risks killing our own people. Additionally, the weather is expected to worsen throughout the day, making air operations increasingly dangerous. This is going to require ground-based tactical precision." The colonel pulled up a detailed topographical map of the valley. The terrain was brutal. Steep, rocky slopes, narrow ravines, and limited visibility due to natural rock formations. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while a blue circle showed where Alpha Squad was trapped. "The primary challenge," Harrison explained, "is neutralizing the sniper teams without alerting the main force holding our soldiers. Intelligence suggests the Taliban fighters are using this as a strategic opportunity. They know we'll come for our people, and they're prepared to inflict maximum casualties on any rescue attempt." Lieutenant Sarah Chen, one of the few women officers present, spoke up from the middle of the room. "Sir, what's our intelligence on the enemy sniper capabilities? Are we dealing with trained marksmen or opportunistic fighters?" "Mixed reports," Harrison admitted. "At least one of the shooters appears to be highly skilled, possibly foreign trained. They've already demonstrated the ability to hit targets at extended range with considerable accuracy. Our trap squad has reported near misses that suggest professional-level marksmanship." The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a training exercise or a routine deployment briefing. American soldiers were in immediate danger, and the complexity of their situation meant that conventional rescue tactics might not be sufficient. Major Thompson, the same officer who had repeatedly denied Cassy's deployment requests, stepped forward. "Colonel, I recommend we deploy our most experienced marksmen immediately. Sergeant Miller has 3 tours in Afghanistan and extensive mountain warfare experience. Corporal Torres has advanced sniper training and knows the regional terrain." Harrison nodded. "Agreed. We're putting together a specialized team with multiple skill sets: long-range marksmanship, mountain climbing, tactical communications, and medical support. Every member needs to be capable of independent operation in hostile territory." As the discussion continued, Cassy found herself studying the tactical display with growing intensity. The terrain reminded her of training exercises she'd completed in Colorado, where the mountainous environment had provided similar challenges. She noticed several potential approach routes that the male officers seemed to be overlooking, paths that would require smaller, more agile team members, but might provide better concealment and positioning advantages. Corporal Hayes, sitting beside her, whispered, "This is exactly the kind of situation where having more experienced soldiers makes the difference. Thank goodness we have guys like Miller and Torres who've actually been in combat." The comment stung, not because it was intended maliciously, but because it reflected the same assumptions that had kept Cassy stateside. Everyone automatically assumed that combat experience was synonymous with male soldiers, ignoring the possibility that untested soldiers might bring fresh perspectives or unique capabilities to challenging situations. Colonel Harrison continued outlining the mission parameters. The rescue team will consist of 6 specialists. They'll be inserted at a staging area approximately 10 kilometers from the target location and will need to approach on foot to avoid detection. The operation window is 18 hours. After that, weather conditions and enemy reinforcements will make extraction significantly more difficult. The room buzzed with tension as officers began discussing personnel assignments. Names were called out, qualifications reviewed, and equipment requirements assessed. It was a familiar process that Cassy had observed many times but never participated in directly. "Sir," Torres called out, "what about the enemy's knowledge of our rescue protocols? If they've studied our tactics, they might anticipate our approach routes." "Valid concern," Harrison acknowledged. "That's why this mission requires adaptive thinking, not just adherence to standard procedures. The team will need to improvise based on real-time conditions and enemy behavior." Miller stood up, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd faced similar situations before. "Colonel, my team and I have trained for exactly this type of scenario. We know how to move through mountain terrain undetected, and we've got the marksmanship skills necessary to neutralize enemy snipers at long range. Give us the authorization and we'll bring our people home." The sentiment was admirable, and Cassy didn't doubt Miller's commitment to the mission. But she also noticed something in his assessment that concerned her. The assumption that this would be a straightforward application of conventional tactics. The terrain and enemy positioning suggested that unconventional approaches might be necessary. "The primary challenge," Captain Rodriguez added, "will be coordinating simultaneous strikes against multiple sniper positions. If we eliminate one team and alert the others, they could execute the hostages before we reach them. We need perfect timing and flawless execution." Harrison pulled up a detailed timeline on the screen. "Intelligence indicates that the enemy snipers rotate positions every 4 hours to avoid counter-sniper tactics. Our window for coordinated strikes will be during the transition period when they're moving between positions. That gives us approximately 20 minutes to neutralize all threats." 20 minutes to save 8 lives. The pressure was enormous, and everyone in the room understood the stakes. Mission failure wouldn't just mean strategic defeat. It would mean losing fellow soldiers who were counting on their colleagues to bring them home safely. "What about extraction after the strikes?" Lieutenant Chen asked. "Even if we neutralize the snipers, we'll still need to get our people out of hostile territory." "Helicopter extraction is planned for a landing zone 2 kilometers from the hostage location," Harrison explained. "But the rescue team will need to secure the area and provide covering fire during the evacuation. Again, this requires soldiers who can operate independently under extreme pressure." As the briefing continued, Cassy felt a familiar frustration building inside her. She had trained for exactly this type of mission: high-stakes marksmanship, mountain terrain navigation, small unit tactics. Her scores in sniper training had consistently ranked in the top percentile, and her psychological evaluations showed exceptional performance under pressure. Yet she wasn't being considered for the team, despite possessing many of the exact qualifications Harrison had outlined. The irony was particularly sharp because this mission seemed designed for her skill set. The emphasis on precision over brute force, the need for adaptive thinking, the requirement for soldiers who could operate effectively in unconventional circumstances. These were areas where her training had specifically prepared her to excel. Miller was discussing equipment requirements with Torres. Their conversation focused on rifle selections, ammunition types, and camouflage considerations. Their expertise was evident, and Cassy respected their experience. But she also knew that experience wasn't the only factor that determined mission success. Sometimes fresh perspectives and unconventional approaches were exactly what complex situations required. Colonel Harrison began wrapping up the briefing. "Team selection will be finalized within the hour. Selected personnel will begin immediate mission preparation, including updated intelligence briefings, equipment checks, and tactical rehearsals. Deployment is scheduled for 1,600 hours today." The timeline was aggressive, less than 12 hours from briefing to deployment. It reflected the urgency of the situation, but also the military's confidence in its personnel and procedures. Soldiers began filing out of the briefing room. Their conversations focused on the technical aspects of the rescue operation. Cassy remained in her seat as the room emptied, staring at the tactical display that still showed the hostile terrain where her fellow soldiers were trapped. She thought about the complex calculations required for long-range marksmanship in mountain environments. Wind speed, elevation changes, atmospheric pressure, target movement patterns. These were problems she'd solved countless times in training, scenarios she'd practiced until the solutions became instinctive. Major Thompson approached her as she prepared to leave. "Sergeant Gomez, you'll be supporting the mission from base operations. We'll need someone to coordinate equipment logistics and maintain communication protocols with the deployment team." The assignment was logical from an administrative perspective, but it felt like another reminder of her exclusion from the very missions she'd trained to support. "Understood, sir," she replied, keeping her voice professional despite her inner disappointment. As she walked back to her quarters, Cassy couldn't shake the feeling that this mission represented everything she'd been preparing for throughout her military career. The combination of technical expertise, physical capability, and mental toughness required for the rescue operation aligned perfectly with her strengths and training. But institutional assumptions about women in combat meant that her capabilities would remain theoretical rather than practical. While she coordinated logistics from a safe office environment, male soldiers would face the real test of skills and courage that she desperately wanted to experience herself. What Cassy couldn't know was that in the mountains of Afghanistan, the situation was evolving in ways that would challenge every assumption about conventional rescue tactics. The enemy was more sophisticated than initial intelligence suggested, and the terrain was proving even more difficult than expected. Soon, the rescue mission would require exactly the kind of innovative thinking and exceptional marksmanship that had been overlooked in the team selection process. The mission was about to become more complex, more dangerous, and more demanding than anyone at Fort Braxton could have anticipated. The rescue mission launched at 1,600 hours sharp, with 6 elite soldiers boarding a transport helicopter bound for the Afghan mountains. From the operations center at Fort Braxton, Cassy monitored radio communications while coordinating equipment manifests and maintaining contact protocols. The massive screens around her displayed real-time satellite feeds, weather data, and communication logs from the field team. Staff Sergeant Miller's voice crackled through the radio as the helicopter approached the insertion point. "Base, this is Alpha Rescue. Terrain is more challenging than briefings indicated. Visibility dropping due to weather front moving in ahead of schedule." Colonel Harrison stood behind the communications array, his jaw tight with concern. "Copy, Alpha Rescue. Mission parameters remain unchanged. Your window for extraction is now 16 hours due to weather deterioration." Cassy tracked the mission timeline on her computer while monitoring supply inventories. Every piece of equipment had been triple-checked, every communication frequency tested, every backup protocol verified. Yet something felt wrong about the entire operation. Not the logistics, which were flawless, but the tactical approach itself. 3 hours into the mission, the first serious problem emerged. Corporal Torres's voice came through the radio, tense and urgent. "Base, we've reached observation point Alpha. Enemy positions are not as intelligence reported. We're counting at least 5 sniper teams, not 3. They've got overlapping fields of fire covering every approach route we identified." The operations center fell silent, except for the hum of electronics and air conditioning. This was significantly worse than expected. Additional enemy forces meant the coordinated strikes would be nearly impossible to execute simultaneously. Captain Rodriguez's voice followed immediately. "Base, requesting updated tactical guidance. Standard approach vectors are compromised. Enemy has established defensive positions that suggest professional military training, not irregular fighters." Harrison grabbed the radio handset. "Alpha Rescue, assess whether mission parameters allow for modified approach. Can you identify alternative strike positions?" Miller's response came after a long pause. "Negative, Base. Terrain funnels us into kill zones regardless of approach angle. Enemy has positioned teams to cover all viable routes. We need close air support or artillery support to proceed." "Negative on air support," Harrison replied immediately. "Weather conditions have grounded all aircraft. Artillery strikes risk hitting our trapped personnel. You'll need to adapt tactics to current situation." In the operations center, Major Thompson leaned over the tactical display, studying satellite imagery with growing frustration. "This is exactly why we need experienced combat veterans on these missions. They know how to improvise when intelligence proves inadequate." But as communications continued, it became clear that experience alone wasn't solving the tactical puzzle. The enemy had created a nearly perfect defensive position, and conventional approaches were proving insufficient against their sophisticated setup. Torres reported back. "Base, we've identified a potential flanking route through the North Ridge, but it requires technical climbing skills and extended exposure time. Estimated approach time would be 8 hours, well beyond our mission window." The mathematics of the situation were becoming increasingly grim. Every viable approach either exceeded the time constraints or exposed the rescue team to unacceptable risks. The trapped soldiers couldn't wait for extended maneuvering, and weather conditions were deteriorating faster than anticipated. Rodriguez's voice carried a hint of desperation. "Base, we need creative solutions here. Standard mountain warfare tactics aren't applicable to this terrain configuration. Enemy has turned geography into an almost impenetrable defensive advantage." Cassy found herself studying the tactical displays with growing intensity. The terrain features, elevation changes, and enemy positioning patterns reminded her of complex problem-solving exercises from advanced marksmanship training. She began sketching calculations on a notepad, working through potential shooting angles and approach vectors that the field team might be missing. Harrison noticed her focused attention. "Sergeant Gomez, you've been studying those displays for 30 minutes. Do you see something we're missing?" The question surprised her. It was the first time her tactical input had been solicited during a real operation. "Sir, the enemy positioning suggests they're expecting conventional approach routes, but there might be unconventional options they haven't anticipated." Thompson looked skeptical. "Such as?" Cassy moved to the main tactical display, pointing to specific terrain features highlighted on the satellite imagery. "The enemy snipers are positioned to cover standard military approach vectors, ridgelines that provide cover and concealment for advancing troops. But they might not be watching for infiltration routes that require different skill sets." She traced a path across the display that followed a series of narrow rock formations and steep ravines. This route would be extremely difficult for a standard infantry unit, but a small team with specialized climbing and marksmanship skills could potentially reach elevated positions behind enemy lines. Harrison studied her proposed route. That path would require technical rock climbing in hostile territory. The exposure time would be significant, and there's no cover if the team is detected. "Yes, sir," Cassy agreed. "But it would also position shooters at angles the enemy hasn't prepared for. Their defensive setup assumes frontal or flanking approaches. They might not be watching for vertical infiltration from below." Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again. "Base, we're running out of viable options here. Enemy patrols are increasing, and our concealment positions are becoming compromised. We need guidance on whether to abort or attempt high-risk approaches." The weight of the decision was crushing. 8 soldiers' lives hung in the balance, and conventional tactics were proving inadequate. Harrison looked around the operations center, seeking input from his staff officers. Major Thompson spoke first. "Sir, I recommend we extract the rescue team and reassess with updated intelligence. We can't risk losing additional personnel in a poorly planned assault." Lieutenant Chen disagreed. "Colonel, we don't have time for extended reassessment. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and the trapped squad situation is becoming more desperate by the hour." Harrison turned to Cassy. "Sergeant Gomez, you've proposed an unconventional approach route. What makes you confident it could work?" The question put her in an impossible position. She was being asked to defend a tactical recommendation based on theoretical knowledge rather than combat experience. Yet the mathematical precision of the approach felt sound to her. "Sir, the route exploits gaps in the enemy's visual coverage. Based on the positioning of their sniper teams, they've created overlapping fields of fire for horizontal approaches, but haven't accounted for vertical infiltration. A small team with advanced marksmanship skills could potentially neutralize multiple targets before the enemy realizes they're under attack." Miller's voice interrupted. "Base, we've got movement in Sector 7, enemy patrol approaching our position. We need immediate guidance on mission continuation." The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Traditional military planning was colliding with an enemy that had prepared for conventional responses. The rescue team was highly trained and experienced, but their expertise was designed for scenarios that followed predictable patterns. Harrison made a command decision. "Alpha Rescue, maintain current position but prepare for immediate extraction if situation becomes untenable. Base will provide updated tactical guidance within 30 minutes." As the radio went quiet, the operations center became a hub of intense discussion. Officers reviewed terrain maps, weather reports, and intelligence assessments, seeking solutions that seemed increasingly elusive. Thompson argued for extraction. "Colonel, we're asking our people to attempt an impossible mission. Sometimes the smart choice is to withdraw and regroup rather than compound losses with poor decisions." Chen countered, "Sir, those trapped soldiers are counting on us. We can't abandon them because the mission is difficult. There has to be a solution we haven't considered." Throughout the debate, Cassy continued studying the tactical displays, refining her understanding of the terrain and enemy positioning. The more she analyzed the situation, the more convinced she became that unconventional approaches might be necessary. She noticed something that had been overlooked in the initial intelligence assessment. The enemy sniper positions were optimized for daylight operations, but their night vision capabilities were limited. Additionally, their defensive setup assumed that rescue attempts would involve multiple personnel, not individual infiltration. "Colonel," she said quietly, "what if the approach team consisted of fewer personnel than planned? The terrain constraints might actually favor a single marksman rather than a coordinated team effort." Harrison paused his discussion with the other officers. "Explain." "The route I identified could accommodate one person moving carefully rather than a team moving together. A single shooter could potentially reach an elevated position undetected and eliminate multiple targets before the enemy realizes what's happening." Thompson scoffed. "Sergeant, you're proposing a suicide mission. One person against multiple enemy positions in hostile territory? That's not tactics, that's fantasy." But Harrison seemed intrigued by the concept. "Continue, Sergeant Gomez." "Sir, the enemy's defensive advantage relies on their ability to coordinate responses and provide mutual support. But if a single shooter could eliminate their sniper team sequentially, their entire defensive structure would collapse. It would require exceptional marksmanship skills and perfect timing, but it's theoretically possible." Rodriguez's voice came through the radio again, more urgent than before. "Base, enemy activity is increasing significantly. We're detecting multiple patrol units moving toward our position. We need immediate extraction or mission authorization within the next hour." The countdown had begun. Within 60 minutes, the rescue team would either need to withdraw or commit to an approach that seemed increasingly desperate. 8 trapped soldiers couldn't wait for extended planning sessions or additional intelligence gathering. Harrison looked around the operations center, his expression reflecting the weight of command responsibility. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need a decision. Conventional approaches aren't working, weather is deteriorating, and time is running out. What do we do?" The silence that followed was filled with tension and uncertainty. Everyone understood that the next decision would determine whether 8 soldiers came home alive, or whether the rescue mission would become another tragedy to add to the war's already heavy toll. What none of them realized was that the solution to their tactical puzzle was standing right there in the operations center, having been systematically excluded from the very mission she was uniquely qualified to execute. Soon, circumstances would force them to reconsider assumptions about who was capable of performing under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Colonel Harrison stared at Cassy's tactical analysis for a long moment, his weathered fingers tracing the unconventional route she had outlined on the display. Around the operations center, other officers exchanged glances that carried a mixture of skepticism and growing curiosity. For the first time since the crisis began, someone had proposed a solution that hadn't been immediately dismissed as impossible. "Sergeant Gomez," Harrison said slowly, "your analysis demonstrates remarkably sophisticated understanding of sniper tactics and mountain warfare. Where exactly did you acquire this expertise?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cassy felt the weight of every eye in the room, understanding that her answer could either validate her tactical recommendations or undermine her credibility entirely. She had carefully avoided discussing her background during her previous deployment requests, knowing that certain details might complicate her military service. "Advanced marksmanship training at Fort Benning, sir. Specialized courses in mountain warfare and long-range precision shooting. I also completed civilian training programs during leave periods." Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly. "Civilian programs? What kind of civilian training produces this level of tactical sophistication?" Major Thompson interjected before Cassy could respond. "Colonel, with respect, we're facing a time-critical situation. Theoretical analysis from support personnel isn't going to solve our tactical problems. We need decisions based on proven combat experience." But Captain Rodriguez, who had been listening to the exchange while monitoring radio communications from the field team, stepped closer to the tactical display. "Actually, sir, her route analysis identifies vulnerabilities that our field team missed. Miller and Torres are both excellent soldiers, but they're thinking conventionally. This situation might require unconventional approaches." Lieutenant Chen pulled up additional satellite imagery on her workstation. "Sergeant Gomez, Your proposed infiltration route passes through terrain that would challenge experienced mountain climbers. What makes you confident that military personnel could navigate it successfully? The question revealed the growing interest in Cassy's tactical insights, but it also highlighted the skepticism about her practical knowledge. She moved to Chen's workstation and began pointing out specific terrain features on the high-resolution imagery. These rock formations provide natural anchor points for climbing equipment. The route follows geological features that would be invisible from the enemy's elevated positions. Someone with proper training could move through this terrain while remaining completely concealed. Rodriguez studied the imagery more carefully. You're talking about technical climbing in a combat environment. That requires specialized skills that most infantry soldiers don't possess. Yes, sir, Cassy agreed. But it also requires skills that some soldiers do possess. The implication was clear, though unspoken. Harrison caught it immediately. Sergeant, are you suggesting that you have the technical climbing skills necessary for this infiltration route? The direct question forced Cassy to reveal more about her background than she had intended. I grew up in El Paso, sir. My family spent summers in the Guadalupe Mountains. I've been rock climbing since I was 12 years old. Thompson scoffed. Recreational climbing and military operations are completely different. You can't compare weekend adventures to combat infiltration. But Harrison was studying Cassy with new attention. What else haven't you mentioned in your service record, Sergeant? The question opened a door that Cassy had kept carefully closed throughout her military career. She glanced around the operations center, aware that her response would fundamentally change how these officers perceived her capabilities. My father was Miguel Gomez, sir, Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan before, she paused, choosing her words carefully, before he was killed in action in 2019. The revelation shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. The 75th Ranger Regiment represented the elite of Army Special Operations, and anyone connected to that unit carried automatic credibility in tactical discussions. Rodriguez leaned forward. Miguel Gomez, I remember that name. He was one of the Rangers killed in the Kabul operation. Exceptional sniper, if I recall correctly. Yes, sir, Cassy confirmed. He held several long-range marksmanship records. He taught me to shoot when I was young, before his deployments became more frequent. Harrison's expression had changed completely. Sergeant, why didn't you include this information in your deployment applications? Because I wanted to serve based on my own qualifications, sir, not because of my father's reputation. Thompson looked genuinely surprised. Your father trained you in marksmanship? What level of training are we talking about? Cassy hesitated, knowing that her answer would reveal capabilities she had deliberately downplayed during her military service. Comprehensive training, sir. Long-range precision shooting, wind calculation, terrain analysis, target acquisition under various conditions. He believed that marksmanship was both science and art. Chen pulled up Cassy's service record on her computer. Your marksmanship scores are exceptional, but you never applied for sniper school. Why not? I applied twice, ma'am. Both applications were denied due to gender restrictions on specialized combat roles. The admission created an uncomfortable silence in the operations center. Everyone understood the implications. Here was a soldier with elite-level training who had been systematically excluded from utilizing those skills in military service. Rodriguez broke the silence. What other training did your father provide? Mountain warfare, desert operations, urban combat techniques. He said that adaptability was the most important skill a soldier could develop. He trained me to think like a sniper, not just shoot like one. Harrison studied the tactical display again, but now he was viewing Cassy's analysis through a completely different lens. Your proposed infiltration route. You've actually visualized yourself executing this mission, haven't you? Yes, sir. I've been analyzing the terrain and enemy positioning for the past hour. The approach is challenging but feasible for someone with the right skill set. Miller's voice crackled through the radio, interrupting the conversation. Base enemy patrols are converging on our position. We need immediate extraction or mission authorization. Our window for action is closing rapidly. The urgency of the field situation crashed back into the tactical discussion. Harrison grabbed the radio handset. Alpha Rescue, maintain position. Base is finalizing tactical guidance. He turned back to the assembled officers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a decision to make. Our experienced rescue team is stymied by enemy positioning. Conventional approaches aren't working. Sergeant Gomez has proposed an unconventional solution that might be viable. Thompson shook his head vigorously. Colonel, you can't be seriously considering sending support personnel on a combat mission. Regardless of her background or training, she lacks actual combat experience. And our experienced personnel lack the specialized skills necessary for the proposed infiltration route, Rodriguez countered. Sometimes missions require capabilities that don't fit standard personnel categories. Chen had been quietly reviewing personnel files on her computer. Sir, I've been checking records for soldiers with both marksmanship and technical climbing qualifications. Sergeant Gomez appears to be the only person on base with documented expertise in both areas. The revelation was stunning in its implications. The military's own personnel classification system had created a situation where the soldier best qualified for this specific mission had been excluded from consideration based on gender rather than capability. Harrison looked directly at Cassy. Sergeant, if you were given authorization for this mission, do you believe you could successfully execute the infiltration and eliminate the enemy sniper teams? The question was both professional and personal. Cassy understood that her answer would determine not only the fate of 8 trapped soldiers, but also her own military future. She thought about her father's training, about years of preparation that had never been put to practical use, about the promise she had made to herself to honor his legacy through service. Yes, sir, I believe I can complete the mission successfully. Thompson exploded. Colonel, this is insane! You're talking about sending an untested soldier on a suicide mission based on childhood training and theoretical analysis. What happens when reality doesn't match her calculations? What happens if we don't try? Chen asked quietly. 8 soldiers died because we were too concerned about protocol to use available resources. Rodriguez was studying the tactical timeline on his workstation. Sir, weather conditions are deteriorating ahead of schedule. If we're going to attempt any rescue operation, we need to make a decision within the next 30 minutes. The pressure was mounting from multiple directions: time constraints, weather conditions, deteriorating field situation, and the fundamental question of whether to trust unconventional solutions when conventional approaches had failed. Harrison walked to the tactical display and stared at the terrain map for several long moments. When he turned back to face the room, his expression reflected the weight of command responsibility. Sergeant Gomez, your tactical analysis is sound, and your qualifications are more extensive than initially apparent. However, authorizing you for this mission would violate multiple regulations regarding women in combat roles. Cassy felt her heart sink, understanding that bureaucratic concerns were about to override tactical necessity. But Harrison wasn't finished speaking. On the other hand, he continued, 8 American soldiers are trapped in hostile territory, and conventional rescue attempts have failed. As commanding officer, I have emergency authorization to utilize all available resources in life-threatening situations. The room fell silent as everyone grasped the implications of his statement. Harrison was considering breaking fundamental military protocols to save the trapped soldiers. Sir, Thompson said urgently, the career implications of this decision could be enormous. If anything goes wrong, Major, 8 soldiers die, Harrison replied sharply. And I'll have to explain to their families why we had a potential solution available but chose not to use it. Miller's voice came through the radio again, more desperate than before. Base, we have visual confirmation of enemy reinforcements approaching from the south. Our position is becoming untenable. We need immediate guidance or extraction authorization. Time had run out for extended deliberation. The next decision would determine whether the rescue mission proceeded with unconventional tactics or whether 8 soldiers would be abandoned to their fate because military regulations prohibited using the most qualified person available. Harrison picked up the radio handset, his hand steady despite the magnitude of the choice he was about to make. In the next few minutes, institutional assumptions about women in combat would collide with the harsh realities of warfare, where results mattered more than regulations. Colonel Harrison's decision shattered every protocol in the military handbook. Alpha Rescue: maintain defensive positions. Bases deploying additional tactical support via unconventional insertion method. Prepare to coordinate with Bravo element for synchronized assault on enemy positions. The operations center erupted in controlled chaos as Harrison turned to face his staff. Major Thompson, prepare emergency mission authorization paperwork. Captain Rodriguez, coordinate equipment requisition for specialized infiltration gear. Lieutenant Chen, establish dedicated communication channels for dual team coordination. Thompson's face had gone pale. "Sir, I need to state for the record that this decision violates multiple regulations regarding—" "Your objection is noted and recorded, Major." Harrison cut him off. "Sergeant Gomez, you have 15 minutes to prepare for immediate deployment. This is no longer theoretical analysis. This is operational reality." Cassy felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, sir. I'll need specific equipment for the infiltration route, technical climbing gear, night vision optics, and a precision rifle optimized for long-range mountain conditions." Rodriguez was already pulling up equipment manifests on his computer. "We have everything you need in specialized inventory. But, Sergeant, I need to ask, are you absolutely certain about your capability to execute this mission under live combat conditions?" The question wasn't meant to undermine her confidence. Rodriguez was ensuring that everyone understood the gravity of the situation. 8 lives depended on her ability to translate years of training into battlefield performance under the most extreme pressure imaginable. "Captain, I've been preparing for this mission my entire life, even when I didn't know it," Cassy replied. "My father always said that training without purpose was just practice, but training with purpose was preparation for destiny." Chen looked up from her communication console. "Sergeant, you'll be operating independently in hostile territory with no backup support. If your position is compromised, extraction will be extremely difficult." "Understood, ma'am. The mission is recovery of trapped personnel, not my personal safety." Harrison studied the tactical timeline one final time. "Sergeant Gomez, your insertion point will be here." He indicated a position on the display map. "Approximately 3 kilometers from the enemy sniper positions. You'll need to traverse difficult terrain while avoiding enemy patrols, reach an elevated firing position, and eliminate multiple targets in coordinated timing with Alpha Rescue's assault." The complexity of the mission was staggering. Cassy would need to infiltrate enemy territory, navigate treacherous mountain terrain in darkness, position herself for precision shots at extended range, and coordinate her actions with a rescue team she couldn't directly communicate with once the operation began. "Sir, what's the coordination protocol for synchronized assault?" she asked. Rodriguez pulled up the tactical timeline. "Alpha Rescue will begin their approach when you signal successful positioning. You'll have approximately 10 minutes to eliminate all sniper teams before they initiate their assault on the main enemy position. 10 minutes to save 8 lives." The mathematical precision required was extraordinary. Multiple targets at different ranges, varying environmental conditions, perfect timing, and flawless execution with no room for error. Miller's voice crackled through the radio. "Base, enemy activity is increasing significantly. We're detecting organized movement patterns, suggesting they're preparing for an assault on our trapped personnel. Time is becoming critical." Harrison grabbed the radio. "Alpha Rescue, Bravo element deploying immediately. Maintain position and prepare for coordinated assault in approximately 4 hours." 4 hours. Cassy would need to cover 3 kilometers of hostile mountain terrain, reach her firing position, and prepare for the most challenging marksmanship test of her life, all while enemy forces were actively hunting for threats. Thompson approached her as she prepared to leave for equipment requisition. "Sergeant, I hope you understand that if this mission fails, it won't just be a tactical defeat. It will set back women's integration into combat roles by decades." The weight of representation was crushing. She wasn't just fighting to save 8 soldiers, she was fighting to prove that women belonged in combat. But Cassy had learned from her father that external pressure could either paralyze a soldier or focus their determination. "Major, I'm not going on this mission to represent women in combat. I'm going to bring our people home. The politics can sort themselves out later." In the equipment bay, Sergeant First Class Williams helped Cassy select specialized gear with the efficiency of someone who understood that lives depended on perfect preparation. "I've pulled the best precision rifle we have," Williams said, "along with ammunition optimized for mountain conditions and extended range." Cassy examined the weapon with practiced expertise, a custom-modified rifle that reminded her of the equipment her father had described from his special operations deployments. The weight was familiar, the balance perfect for precision shooting. "Williams, this weapon isn't standard military issue," she observed. "No, it's not. Some of our special operations personnel use customized equipment for specific mission requirements. Colonel Harrison authorized access to restricted inventory for this operation." The climbing gear was equally specialized, lightweight but incredibly strong, designed for technical ascents in hostile environments. Every piece of equipment represented years of development and testing by soldiers who understood that marginal advantages could determine mission success. Chen approached as Cassy completed her equipment check. "Sergeant, I've established your communication protocols. You'll have limited radio contact due to terrain interference, but we'll maintain satellite tracking of your position. What about coordination with Alpha Rescue once I'm in position?" "Visual signals only. You'll need to use predetermined light patterns to communicate your status and coordinate timing for the assault." The isolation was complete. Once deployed, Cassy would be entirely dependent on her training, equipment, and judgment. No backup support, no second chances, no margin for error. Rodriguez joined them for the final mission briefing. "Sergeant, intelligence indicates that enemy sniper teams are using thermal optics and motion detection equipment. Your approach will need to account for sophisticated surveillance capabilities." "Understood, Captain. I'll be moving during weather conditions that should limit thermal effectiveness, and I've planned approach routes that use natural concealment." Harrison appeared as they finished the tactical review. "Sergeant Gomez, transport helicopter is prepared for immediate departure. You'll be inserted at the coordinates we discussed, and from that point you'll be operating independently." The moment of deployment had arrived. Cassy shouldered her equipment pack and checked her weapon one final time. Around her, the operations center buzzed with activity as personnel coordinated the most unconventional rescue mission in the base's history. "Sir," she said to Harrison, "I want you to know that regardless of the outcome, I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve in the capacity I trained for." Harrison's expression was grim but determined. "Sergeant, bring our people home. That's all any of us want." The helicopter ride to the insertion point was 45 minutes of darkness and tension. Cassy used the time to review terrain maps, check equipment, and mentally rehearse the infiltration route she had studied for hours. The aircraft flew low to avoid enemy radar, its path carefully planned to deposit her at the optimal starting point for her approach. As they neared the insertion coordinates, the crew chief signaled 5 minutes to deployment. Below them, the Afghan mountains stretched endlessly, their peaks shrouded in clouds that would provide cover for her movement but also create additional challenges for navigation. "Bravo element, this is transport," the pilot's voice came through her headset. "Insertion point in 2 minutes. Weather conditions are marginal but acceptable for deployment." Cassy double-checked her equipment straps and weapon security. In 2 minutes, she would be alone in hostile territory, beginning a mission that would either validate years of training or result in the worst military disaster of her career. The helicopter touched down briefly in a rocky clearing, its rotors churning up dust and debris. Cassy jumped out and immediately moved away from the aircraft as it lifted off, disappearing into the darkness and leaving her completely alone. She was 3 kilometers from the enemy positions, in mountains controlled by Taliban fighters, carrying enough specialized equipment to make her a high-value target if captured. The temperature was dropping, wind was picking up, and she had less than 4 hours to reach her firing position and prepare for the most important shots of her life. But as she began moving through the treacherous terrain, following the route she had memorized from satellite imagery, Cassy felt something she hadn't experienced since joining the military: complete alignment between her training and her mission. For the first time, she was being asked to use every skill her father had taught her, every capability she had developed, every instinct she had honed through years of preparation. The mountains ahead were dangerous, the enemy was sophisticated, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But Sergeant Cassy Gomez was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she had been trained to do. Now she just had to prove that all those years of being underestimated had been preparing her for this moment when being underestimated would become her greatest tactical advantage. The Afghan mountains at night were a maze of shadows, razor-sharp rocks, and deadly silence. Cassy moved through the terrain like a ghost, her father's training echoing in every calculated step. Mountain warfare isn't about conquering the environment. Miguel Gomez had taught her during their summer climbs in the Guadalupe Mountains. It's about becoming part of it, reading its moods, respecting its power. 2 hours into her infiltration, Cassy had covered nearly half the distance to her target position. The route she had identified from satellite imagery proved even more challenging than expected. Loose rock that could trigger avalanches, cliff faces that required technical climbing skills, and narrow passages where a single misstep would mean a fatal fall into darkness. But the difficulties that would have stopped conventional soldiers became advantages for someone with her unique background. The Taliban fighters had positioned their sentries to watch for military vehicles and standard infantry approaches. They weren't watching for a lone climber moving through terrain that most people would consider impassable. At a rest stop behind a boulder formation, Cassy checked her equipment and reviewed her mental map of the target area. Through her night vision scope, she could see lights in the distance. The enemy positions where Taliban snipers maintained their deadly watch over the trapped American soldiers. Her radio crackled softly with an encrypted transmission from base. Bravo element, this is base. Status report. Base Bravo element is 70% to target position. No enemy contact. Terrain is challenging but manageable. Estimate arrival at firing position in 90 minutes. Copy Bravo element. Alpha Rescue reports increasing enemy activity around trapped personnel. Time pressure is mounting. Cassy understood the implication. The Taliban fighters were preparing for something, possibly an assault on the trapped soldiers or a coordinated hunt for the rescue team. Every minute she spent climbing brought the situation closer to a deadly climax. She resumed her movement, pushing harder through the treacherous terrain. Her breathing remained controlled despite the physical exertion, a technique her father had drilled into her during their mountain training sessions. Fatigue is the enemy of precision, he had said. A tired sniper is a dead sniper. As she climbed higher, details about the enemy positions became clearer through her optics. The Taliban had established a sophisticated defensive network, not the improvised positions of irregular fighters, but carefully planned overlapping fields of fire that demonstrated professional military knowledge. 3 sniper teams occupied elevated positions on different ridges, each with thermal imaging equipment and long-range communication capabilities. Below them, additional fighters maintained security patrols and supply lines. The setup was far more complex than initial intelligence had suggested. But complexity also meant predictability for someone trained to analyze enemy tactics. Cassy began identifying patterns in the patrol rotations, gaps in surveillance coverage, and communication protocols that she could exploit during her assault. 40 minutes from her target position, she encountered her first serious obstacle, a vertical rock face that required rope climbing in complete darkness while carrying 40 pounds of specialized equipment. The technical challenge was extreme, but it was also the reason her route would remain undetected. As she secured her climbing gear and prepared for the ascent, memories of her father's training flooded back. Cassy Gomez had insisted that she master technical climbing not just for recreation, but because mountain warfare often required soldiers to go where enemies didn't expect them. Mija, he had said during one particularly difficult climb in the Guadalupe Peaks, the military will teach you to be a good soldier, but I'm teaching you to be an exceptional one. Someday you might face a situation where being exceptional is the only thing that saves lives. That someday had arrived. The rope climb took 20 minutes of careful, silent movement. Every handhold had to be tested, every movement calculated to avoid dislodging rocks that could alert enemy sentries. By the time she reached the top of the cliff face, Cassy's muscles burned with exertion, but her hands remained steady, the mark of conditioning that went beyond physical fitness into mental discipline. The markism. From her new elevation, the tactical situation became crystal clear. The enemy sniper positions were even more sophisticated than satellite imagery had revealed. They had constructed reinforced shooting platforms with multiple exit routes, backup communication systems, and interlocking support positions. But they had made one critical error. Their entire defensive setup assumed that threats would come from below, not from above. Cassy's position gave her angles of fire that the enemy hadn't anticipated or prepared for. She reached her predetermined firing position, a natural rock formation that provided concealment, stability, and clear sightlines to all 3 enemy sniper teams. The mathematics of the shot sequence began forming in her mind. Range calculations, wind compensation, target movement patterns, and timing coordination with Alpha Rescue's assault. Base Bravo element is in position, she whispered into her radio. I have visual confirmation of all target positions. Enemy strength is greater than intelligence estimated, but firing solutions are viable. Copy Bravo element. Alpha Rescue is requesting final coordination. Are you prepared to execute on their signal? Cassy settled into her firing position, adjusting her rifle's scope and calculating environmental factors that would affect bullet trajectory. Wind speed was moderate but variable, elevation differences created complex ballistic challenges, and she would need to engage 3 separate targets within a narrow time window. Base Bravo element is ready. Targets are designated Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie in order of engagement priority. Estimated engagement time is 8 minutes for all 3 positions. Understood. Alpha Rescue will begin their approach when you signal target Alpha neutralized. The coordination was precise, but unforgiving. Once Cassy fired her first shot, she would have less than 8 minutes to eliminate all 3 sniper teams before they could respond effectively or alert the main force holding the trapped soldiers. Through her scope, she studied the first target, a Taliban sniper positioned approximately 600 meters away on an elevated ridge. The fighter was using professional-grade equipment and demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested extensive training. But as Cassy settled into her shooting position, something unexpected happened. The enemy sniper shifted his position, and for a moment, his profile was illuminated by ambient light from his thermal imaging device. What she saw made her blood run cold. The fighter wasn't Taliban. His equipment, positioning, and tactical discipline indicated foreign military training, possibly Russian or Iranian special forces operating as advisors or mercenaries. She quickly scanned the other 2 positions through her scope. Both showed similar signs of professional military training and equipment that exceeded typical Taliban capabilities. This wasn't a local insurgent operation. It was a sophisticated enemy force that had been specifically positioned to trap and eliminate American Special Operations personnel. The revelation changed everything. Her targets weren't just skilled fighters. They were professional soldiers with training that might match her own. The tactical challenge had just become exponentially more difficult. Base Bravo element has updated intelligence on enemy positions, she whispered urgently into her radio. Targets appear to be foreign military advisors, not local Taliban fighters. Enemy capabilities are significantly greater than anticipated. The response came immediately. Copy Bravo element. Does this change your assessment of mission viability? Cassy studied the 3 positions again, calculating angles, ranges, and timing with the precision her father had drilled into her during countless training sessions. The enemy was professional, but they had made the same mistake that had allowed her to reach this position undetected. They had underestimated the possibility of unconventional approaches. Base. Mission remains viable. Target engagement will proceed as planned. As she made final adjustments to her rifle scope, Cassy thought about the trapped soldiers depending on her accuracy, the rescue team preparing to risk their lives based on her performance, and her father's legacy that had brought her to this moment. Miguel Gomez had died fighting these same mountains, killed by an enemy that used superior positioning and professional training to ambush American forces. Now his daughter had the opportunity to turn those same advantages against a sophisticated enemy that thought they controlled the tactical situation. The wind shifted slightly, requiring a minor adjustment to her scope settings. In the distance, she could see Alpha Rescue beginning to move into assault positions, trusting that she would clear the way for their approach. 8 American lives depended on the next 8 minutes. Cassy Gomez steadied her breathing, centered her scope on the first target, and prepared to prove that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you never see coming. At 0247 hours, in complete darkness on a mountain ridge in Afghanistan, Cassy Gomez became the weapon her father had spent years forging. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final calculations for a shot that would either save 8 American lives or doom them all. Target Alpha was a Russian-trained sniper positioned 627 meters away, using thermal optics to scan for the rescue team. Through her scope, Cassy could see him methodically sweeping sectors, his movements precise and professional. This wasn't some militant with basic training. This was a soldier who understood advanced tactics and would react instantly to any threat. The wind had picked up, creating complex air currents that would affect bullet trajectory across the mountainous terrain. Cassy closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the air movement against her skin, calculating the compensation needed for each target at different ranges and elevations. Wind from the northwest at approximately 8 miles per hour, gusting to 12, she whispered to herself, adjusting her scope accordingly. Target Alpha, 627 meters, elevation advantage 43 feet. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm her father had taught her during their training sessions in Texas. The shot doesn't begin when you pull the trigger, mija, Miguel had said. It begins when you become completely still, when your heartbeat syncs with the mountain, when you stop being separate from the rifle. Through her earpiece, she heard Alpha Rescue's whispered communication. Base were in position for assault, waiting for Bravo element to clear the overwatch. The pressure was immense. Miller, Torres, and the rest of Alpha Rescue were depending on her ability to eliminate 3 professional snipers before they could respond. The 8 trapped soldiers were counting on perfect execution of a plan that existed only in theory until this moment. Cassy centered her crosshairs on target Alpha's head, compensating for wind drift and the slight upward angle of her shot. At this range, with these conditions, she had approximately a 4-inch margin of error. Miss by more than that, and her position would be exposed to return fire from professional military snipers. She exhaled slowly, letting her body settle into complete stillness. The world contracted to the precise intersection of crosshairs and target, everything else fading into irrelevance. This was the state her father had called the quiet place, where noise disappeared, doubt vanished, and only pure focus remained. The trigger squeeze was gradual, building pressure until the rifle fired with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the mountain silence. Through her scope, she watched target Alpha drop instantly, his thermal imaging device clattering against the rocks as his body went limp. 1 down, 2 to go. Target Bravo reacted immediately, spinning toward the sound of the gunshot while reaching for his radio. Cassy was already transitioning to her second target, working the bolt of her rifle to chamber another round while adjusting for the new range and angle. Target Bravo, 543 meters, elevation disadvantage 27 feet, she calculated rapidly. The second sniper was moving, trying to locate the source of the shot that had killed his teammate. His movement made him a more difficult target, but it also prevented him from effectively engaging Alpha Rescue. Cassy led the target slightly, accounting for his movement pattern and the different ballistic characteristics of this shot. Wind conditions had shifted in the 30 seconds since her first shot, requiring real-time adjustment to her compensation calculations. The second shot cracked across the mountain valley just as target Bravo raised his radio to his mouth. The bullet struck him center mass, spinning him around before he collapsed behind his rock fortification. His radio flew from his hand, shattering against the stones. 2 down, 1 to go. But target Charlie had heard both shots and was reacting with the tactical sophistication of advanced military training. Instead of exposing himself to search for the sniper, he was withdrawing to a more protected position while simultaneously engaging Alpha Rescue with suppressing fire. Bravo element, target Charlie is repositioning, Cassy whispered into her radio. He's trying to prevent Alpha Rescue's approach while calling for backup. Copy Bravo element, Alpha Rescue is taking fire, time is critical. Through her scope, Cassy could see muzzle flashes as target Charlie engaged the rescue team with accurate rifle fire. His position was partially concealed behind rock formations, and he was moving systematically to deny Alpha Rescue any safe approach routes. The third shot would be the most challenging, a moving target at long range, partially concealed, actively engaged in combat. But it was also the most critical shot, because target Charlie was the key to the entire enemy defensive network. Cassy studied his movement pattern, looking for predictable behaviors she could exploit. Professional snipers were trained to avoid predictability, but they were also trained to maintain effective fields of fire. Those requirements created constraints that limited his movement options. She identified his likely next position, a rock outcropping that would give him optimal angles to engage Alpha Rescue while maintaining escape routes. If she could anticipate his movement and time her shot perfectly, she could eliminate him before he reached that dominant position. Target Charlie, estimated range 675 meters, moving target, partial concealment, she calculated. This shot required her to predict where he would be when the bullet arrived, accounting for his speed, direction, and the time of flight across the extended range. The mathematics were complex, but her father's training had prepared her for exactly this type of challenge. Advanced marksmanship isn't about perfect conditions, Mija, he had said. It's about making impossible shots when everything is working against you. Cassy tracked target Charlie's movement through her scope, waiting for the moment when his pattern would bring him into her predicted position. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and she'd miss behind him. Too late, and he'd reach cover where Alpha Rescue couldn't advance. She controlled her breathing, steadied her rifle, and began the trigger squeeze just as target Charlie moved toward his intended position. The shot would take approximately 1.2 seconds to reach the target area, during which time he would cover roughly 4 feet of ground. The rifle fired just as target Charlie stepped into the exact position Cassy had calculated. The bullet struck him before he realized he was under fire, dropping him instantly and silencing his weapon. 3 targets eliminated in less than 4 minutes. Base Bravo element has neutralized all Overwatch positions. Alpha Rescue is clear to advance. Copy, Bravo element. Excellent work. Alpha Rescue, you are cleared hot for assault on primary target. Through her scope, Cassy watched Alpha Rescue emerge from their concealed positions and begin their approach to the location where 8 American soldiers had been trapped for hours. Without the sniper overwatch, the Taliban fighters holding the hostages lost their primary tactical advantage. The rescue assault developed quickly. Miller and Torres led their team through the terrain with the confidence of soldiers who knew their route was clear of threats. Gunfire erupted as they engaged the remaining enemy forces. But without the elevation advantage provided by the sniper teams, the Taliban position became untenable. Base Alpha Rescue has visual on friendly forces. Miller's voice came through the radio. 8 personnel confirmed alive, beginning extraction procedures. Relief flooded through Cassy as she maintained overwatch on the rescue operation. Her mission was complete, but she remained in position to provide additional fire support if needed during the extraction. 15 minutes later, Alpha Rescue's voice crackled through the radio with the words everyone had been waiting to hear. Base, this is Alpha Rescue. All 8 friendly personnel recovered successfully. Casualties are minor. Extraction is proceeding to primary landing zone. Copy, Alpha Rescue. Outstanding work. Bravo element, maintain position until extraction helicopter clears the area. As she watched the rescue team move toward safety with their recovered personnel, Cassy thought about her father's words from their final conversation before his deployment. Mija, sometimes the most important thing a soldier can do is be in the right place at the right time with the right skills. When that moment comes, everything you've learned will matter. That moment had come, and everything she had learned, from childhood climbing in Texas mountains to advanced military training, had mattered in ways she never could have imagined. The extraction helicopter appeared as a distant sound that gradually became visible lights moving across the valley. Within minutes, all American personnel would be safely away from the hostile territory where they had been trapped. Bravo element, this is base. Mission accomplished. Prepare for extraction at secondary landing zone. As Cassy prepared to leave her position, she took one final look through her scope at the 3 locations where enemy snipers had threatened American lives. The precision of her shots, the timing of her engagement, and the coordination with Alpha Rescue had achieved something that conventional tactics could not. But more than that, she had proven that capability mattered more than assumptions, that training trumped prejudice, and that sometimes the most unlikely soldier becomes exactly the weapon a mission requires. The helicopter that would extract her was already approaching, but Cassy Gomez had already accomplished something far more significant than a successful mission. She had shattered every assumption about women in combat and established a new standard for what was possible when talent was allowed to flourish regardless of gender. The debriefing room at Fort Braxton had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. 3 hours after the successful rescue operation, the assembled personnel represented a cross-section of military leadership, grappling with the implications of what had just occurred. Colonel Harrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by Major Thompson, Captain Rodriguez, and Lieutenant Chen. At the far end, Sergeant Cassy Gomez sat quietly, still wearing her field uniform, her equipment bag at her feet. "Let's review the facts," Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of command decision-making. 8 American soldiers were trapped in hostile territory by a sophisticated enemy force. Conventional rescue attempts failed due to professional-grade sniper overwatch. An unconventional approach utilizing Sergeant Gomez's specialized skills resulted in successful mission completion with 0 friendly casualties. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Everyone in the room understood that they had witnessed something that would fundamentally change military policy discussions for years to come. Major Thompson cleared his throat. "Sir, I need to address the elephant in the room. This mission violated multiple regulations regarding women in combat roles. Regardless of the successful outcome, we're going to face serious questions from higher command." Harrison's expression didn't change. "Major, 8 American soldiers are alive today because we used the best available resource for an impossible mission. I'll take full responsibility for any policy violations, but I won't apologize for bringing our people home. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. Colonel, the tactical intelligence Sergeant Gomez provided was more accurate than our conventional assessment. Her infiltration route, target analysis, and execution were flawless. This wasn't luck. This was exceptional professional capability. Lieutenant Chen pulled up mission statistics on her tablet. Sir, the precision of the 3 sniper eliminations was extraordinary. Average shot distance was 615 meters in adverse conditions with moving targets. All 3 shots were lethal within 4 minutes. Those are numbers that would be impressive for our most experienced special operations snipers. The data told a story that contradicted every assumption about women's capabilities in combat. Cassy had not only succeeded in an impossible mission, she had exceeded performance standards that few male soldiers could match. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. I'm not questioning Sergeant Gomez's performance. I'm concerned about the precedent this sets and the potential backlash from command structure that wasn't consulted about this decision. Harrison stood and walked to the tactical display that still showed the Afghan terrain where the rescue had occurred. Major, sometimes leadership requires making decisions that prioritize mission success over bureaucratic comfort. Today, that decision saved 8 lives. Sir, Cassy spoke for the first time since the debriefing began. If I may address the policy concerns? Harrison nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant. The success of this mission wasn't about proving women belong in combat, it was about using the right tool for a specific job. The military trains soldiers to develop specialized capabilities, then deploys those capabilities when they're needed. Gender should be irrelevant if the capability matches the mission requirement. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. We don't question whether a communications specialist is qualified to handle radio operations based on gender. We shouldn't question whether a qualified marksman can handle precision shooting based on gender either. Chen looked up from her tablet. Sergeant Gomez, your personnel file shows consistent top-tier performance in every military training program. Why haven't you been considered for special operations roles before? Because those roles were restricted to male personnel, ma'am, my applications were denied before they reached evaluation stages. The admission hung in the air like an indictment of systemic inefficiency. The military had possessed exceptional capability that it had systematically ignored based on gender rather than merit. Thompson's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, and his expression grew tense. Sir, that's General Morrison's office. Word about this mission has reached Division Command. Harrison straightened. Put it on speaker, Major. The voice that filled the room belonged to one of the Army's most senior officers. Colonel Harrison, I understand you deployed female personnel in a combat role without authorization. I need a full explanation immediately. General Morrison, Sergeant Gomez executed a successful rescue mission that saved 8 American lives when conventional approaches failed. Her performance exceeded all mission parameters. Colonel, I don't care if she performed miracles. Military regulations exist for operational reasons, not suggestions to be ignored when convenient. Harrison's jaw tightened. General, respectfully, operational success should validate tactical decisions. Sergeant Gomez proved that capability matters more than regulations. Rodriguez stepped closer to the phone. General Morrison, this is Captain Rodriguez. I observed Sergeant Gomez's tactical analysis and mission execution firsthand. Her performance was exceptional by any standard. Captain, I'm not questioning her individual performance. I'm questioning the command decision to violate established policy without consultation. Chen joined the conversation. Sir, if I may provide operational context, the mission timeline didn't allow for extended consultation. Colonel Harrison made a battlefield decision using available resources. General Morrison's voice carried clear frustration. The policy implications of this decision extend beyond individual mission success. If we ignore regulations for exceptional circumstances, we undermine the entire regulatory structure. Cassy stood up from her chair. General Morrison, may I speak? You're the soldier in question? Yes, sir. Sergeant Cassy Gomez. Go ahead, Sergeant. Sir, I understand the policy concerns, but I'd like to address the operational realities. The enemy we faced had professional military training and sophisticated equipment. They had positioned themselves to defeat conventional rescue attempts. My father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Gomez of the 75th Rangers, taught me that adaptability is the most important military skill. Today, adaptability meant using unconventional resources for an unconventional threat. The mention of Miguel Gomez created a noticeable pause in the conversation. General Morrison's tone shifted slightly. "Miguel Gomez? I knew your father, Sergeant. He was an exceptional soldier." In military training facilities across the country, instructors now teach Cassy's mission as an example of how exceptional results emerge when talent is recognized and utilized regardless of traditional assumptions. Her story became proof that the most dangerous enemies are often the ones you never see coming, and sometimes the most valuable soldiers are the ones you never expected to need. Today, when young women consider military service, they know that capability and dedication can overcome institutional barriers. Cassy Gomez proved that being underestimated can become a tactical advantage, that precision matters more than prejudice, and that sometimes the quiet soldier in the corner possesses exactly the skills that impossible missions require. Her father had trained her to be ready for a moment when everything she learned would matter. That moment had come, and through her courage and competence, she had not only saved 8 lives but had forever changed what the military understood about the warriors in its ranks. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.